The latest HILDA survey has shown that Australians are getting richer, we're living longer. Unfortunately, we're surprisingly getting a little bit lonelier as well. So last week, Simon Kirstenmacher and I dug into the results of the latest HILDA survey and how Australia is changing, how it's affecting our housing markets, our workforce, and even the social fabric. And that's what we're going to continue in our discussion today in part 2. So welcome to Demographics Decoded. Hi, I'm Michael Yardney, and each week I'm joined by leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher, and together we dig deep behind the data to uncover trends shaping our future, our economies, our community, and so helping you, if you're an owner, a business owner, a professional, a property investor, understand what this means for your future prosperity. Simon, we had a good start to our discussion about the HILDA report last week, and I'd like to dig into it in a little bit more detail today.
Yeah, now we're tackling the more serious elements of the HILDA research.
Now, for those of you who didn't listen to last week's show, hey, you don't have to listen to it right now, but it'd be worthwhile going back wherever you're listening to this on your podcast player on YouTube or Spotify so that you can listen to the first parts, where last week we discussed that Australians are earning more but are feeling a bit poorer. The fact that costs of living are rising, particularly childcare, rent, insurance. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about what the fact that Australians are working longer in life means, what the implications are. But Simon, for those who haven't heard the first part of this, what is the HILDA report and why do you as a demographer place so much store on it?
So the HILDA survey runs longitudinal data research. So we interview heaps of households about their behavior on the labor market and how they spend their time. So we have a bit of, really, it's a way of putting a human face on hard economic data and demographic data. So that means we really understand how Australia works right now and how this behavior changed over the last 2 decades or so. And we then see really what has been emerging in Australia. We can then draw conclusions about what might emerge into the future.
Well, that's really important, and we'll dig into some of those things. So last week we started to talk about the fact that Australians work longer, not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to. But once they do retire, the HILDA report showed that on average, Australians are retiring wealthier.
Yes, and that makes sense because you now have the baby boomer cohort entering retirement. This is a cohort that managed to accrue a lot of wealth, so that's quite nice. And so now you have wealthier retirees, and that still sometimes confuses people. I think, for example, the RBA is still confused by this because they still haven't factored new demographic realities into their forecast. They always keep being confused by high consumption figures that, of course, drive inflation. You have the baby boomer cohorts in retirement at the moment still spending more money than they did before on average. And so that, of course, is inflationary. And the RBA still thinks of new retirees as deflationary assets who, allegedly drive down their spending patterns straight away. And that's not the case because people act according to their actual financial circumstances. And that is a bit weird to me. Anyways, that's my RBA aside here. We are now facing a retiree cohort that is wealthier on average, which is very, very good. But of course, within this retiree cohort, we divide the cohort into asset owners and non-asset owners increasingly.
Yes.
And so if you're an asset owner and you have an outright wealth, I think of $1.66 million or something like this, that's very nice. So you have the asset and hopefully you have other savings so that you're not asset rich, but income poor. And so you can spend money in retirement. But what happens when you don't own a house? Well, that means you have limited fixed income now. And a big chunk of this income is forced to go towards your rent, your electricity bill. These are essentially non-negotiable. So you can't change all that much in those costs. And then you might be poor in old age. So we say that the best predictor for poverty in old age is that you are not a homeowner. And that's quite problematic. So, and of course, by now, we still have with the boomers a cohort in retirement that has a relatively high share of home ownership. The next cohorts, they will have lower share of home ownership. And so that then means that managing the financial costs for these retirees that are not asset owners becomes more expensive.
That's a challenge for the government because there's more people who are going to be on the pension, more people are going to need health service, and that's going to need more taxpayers more workers.
Exactly. And that again is a nice little aside to the migration story, because you see that we have this big need for not just servicing the old population through healthcare services, through aged care services, through just supermarket and everything consumption services, but also we need to replace the retiring big baby boomer cohort from a tax perspective, because they're now paying less tax. And we tend to get most of our tax, 52%, through income tax. So if you were to slow down migration, for example, not only would you limit your workers, which is something that you might say maybe AI can help us, but more importantly, it means where the hell does my money come from if I'm the federal government? Because I tend to get most of my money from income tax. So if I wanted to cut migration as a government, I could do it, I guess, but I must then tax you in some other way. So if you talk about cutting migration, you must at the same time tell me how you are going to get your taxable income. And this could be business tax. It could be a doubling of GST. It could be a land tax, get rid of stamp duty, introduce a hefty land tax, a death tax. All of these things are possibilities, but are they likely, politically speaking? I would say no. But we'll see what parties might come up with. But I think that high migration is going to continue unabated.
That's probably the easiest of the various solutions. The fact that there are more Australians who are retiring wealthier, I guess it comes from the fact that they own their home and they own their own home outright. That doesn't necessarily mean they've got the cash flow they require. So I guess it also creates some implications for our housing, how people want to live, what baby boomers want to do. Are they right sizing? Are they downsizing, or are they staying where they are? So
Well, so for downsizing, you can say that the owners have options. So you then could theoretically downsize, and that's nice because, hey, whatever, sell the $2 million family home, move into a nice $1 million apartment, and man, just use the rest to live like a king or queen in retirement. Renters don't have those options so much because there is so very limited supply on the market at the moment. So that's difficult to begin with. We also see implications for government support here. Well, rising pensions, you must increase the pension payouts if you have a bigger chunk of people that are lifelong renters, because somehow you must finance their living costs. Maybe you don't increase pension payouts, maybe you just pay for the rent. So it's rental assistance, but it's more money, or whatever you want to name it. Yeah? Then you have those intergenerational arguments here that the baby boomers who are now retiring on assets, they will hand down assets to their kids. The baby boomers who are renters, they will not hand down assets to their kids. So therefore you widen the divide in the younger generations as well. That, of course, then in terms leads to political tensions where the older owners, they are politically much more organized. They have more heft, politically speaking, than the renters because there are more of them. I mentioned in the past that of the voting population, only 26% are renters. So why would any politician make policies that are favoring renters? You'd rather make policy that favors the 3/4 of the population of the voting population that have a house or a mortgage on their house. So that then means, well, okay, so maybe we can counter this through housing policy. Maybe we can create more social and affordable housing. And we're fudging around the edges. We're trying to do this a bit now, but we are way behind the housing targets that the government set and so forth. So yeah, I think there's just much more suffering going to be ahead, which leads to great financial advice from me, like, don't end up in the bottom quarter of the income bracket, because that's not going to be fun at all. It's terrible, dumb advice, but that's the best advice that I can come up with. Is a certain base level of wealth is absolutely crucial in the current environment.
unfortunately, in Australia, the gap between those who own property and those that don't is widening and will only continue. I wouldn't say that the younger generation should be despondent about it, Simon. What they have got is time on their side that the older generation haven't. So even if your parents aren't going to hand you assistance, whether it's to get into your first home or leaving you an inheritance, don't give up, because there's still opportunities.
Yeah, and so, but then of course, the hurdles for these young people is that you need to be strategic and deliberate. And quite often, just the whole idea of getting started is very, very difficult because who teaches you? Not your parents. And so you must somehow find a way into this type of knowledge to pull this off. And that first hurdle is very, very hard. There are plenty of Michael Yardney books that you can get from your library for free. But
Well, let me give a shameless plug for my property
yeah,
update newsletter, where every day there's 8 articles about property success and money, and for my other podcast, the Michael Yardney podcast, because yes, you do need to get the right advice. Unfortunately, there's lots of people on TikTok and social media giving poor financial advice.
and that makes that's the idea that at the moment we have in the online information world, we have so much noise, and of course now
Yes.
this gets absolutely amplified through just quickly AI created nonsense that gets thrown out there. So just filtering the good from the bad is increasingly difficult if you just rock up to the show as a young person. And so finding a trusted advisor of sorts is absolutely crucial because in a sense, and that's what you do with your newsletter, you do the filtering for the readers. And that's a gift. And I hope that we'll see more and more of this across the whole media space, which is why I'm predicting that the existing mainstream media sources will become more popular again because they are well equipped from their current setup to do the information filtering for us. And so that's something that
Great.
I would advise a big news organization to focus on. But it will also lead to more people like us who are humble subject matter experts and who do the filtering in just their small, tiny, bizarre niche of the world. And so I point to what I think are interesting demographic trends, and I use my professional career background skills as a filter. And you're doing this in the world of property. There are plenty of people in each niche already out there, but
Yes.
finding them is the first really big art.
Well, we're digging into the data from the HILDA report, and one of the things that we've discussed in previous episodes of Demographics Decoded is that family intentions for having children has changed. Is it because of money? Why is the desired family size dropping?
It's dropping firstly for hard economic realities. It is more expensive to buy a house to put your new family in. That certainly plays a role. You have gender equality emerge as a thing. So this is the idea that there is no glass ceilings anymore. You can pick and choose your career. And so it's a narrative that tells women very, very clearly, you must have a career. Because now the women of yesteryear, they fought tooth and nail for you to have those opportunities. And who are you to now give up on those opportunities? It's quite a perverse logic, because not only do you have the opportunities, you're also being criticized if you don't take up those opportunities and choose family over career at a certain point in your life. So this is a bit of a lose-lose situation that we created for young women there. That is difficult. And we still have the standard problems of, well, if you are more educated, women are much more educated than men. They outperform them on every level of education by a long shot. So that means you move through uni and yet another degree at uni. So all of a sudden, you only start your working life in your mid to late 20s. You then want to establish yourself a bit in your career before you have kids. So you only start families in your mid 30s quite often, the late 30s even. And so that means you can't squeeze in many more kids then. The window is closing there. And so that just plays out there. We see in the US, and it's funnily enough, like in the US, everything has a political tint. We see this big push to kids first, career second. These are women conservative women, there's a conservative movement, who deliberately choose to have kids in their early to mid 20s, get essentially through their 2 kids rather quickly, and then reboot their career at 30. And that's when both kids are at school. And I go, is that a smarter approach? And I think biologically speaking, it potentially is a smarter approach. But so then you go, each to their own. Yeah, everybody has to make those decisions by themselves. But maybe this is a cultural first trend that points into a new direction. So we'll see how this plays out. But for now, we just see fewer kids and kids later in life.
So should Australia be thinking more seriously about pronatal policies, or are we just having a losing battle with all this?
So pronatal policies, there's no proof that this works at all whatsoever. This is the idea: you give out baby bonuses, you give out...
I remember the baby bonus of a few years ago, and people said it worked, but I think that was more a coincidence.
No, exactly. So Peter Costello to this day claims that the baby bonus, because it's quite simple. The birth rates were super high after the end of the Second World War, and they essentially fell nonstop ever since, except for this one time around 2007, 8, when there was this tiny little blip up and then it went down again. And Peter Costello said this blip was happening when I gave out the baby bonus. So that's my baby bonus. But it's not true. What this was the mining boom. The mining boom created an environment where everyone in Australia thought that they will be forever richer, that this economy will boom and boom, that everything will go up and up and up. And you are more confident to put a family into this type of environment. So if you wanted to drive the birth rate up, if you wanted a pronatal policy, all you need to do is create a sense of economic optimism for decades on end. You need to make sure that Australia is going to be bloody wealthy for the next coming decades, and you need to guarantee that this wealth is going to be spread across the population. If you can pull this off, your birth rates will most certainly increase. But it's anyone's guess
Oh,
how likely that is.
now, we're discussing the HILDA report, a great longitudinal study. And as a demographer, Simon, I bet in your day-to-day work, this is one of the things, plus the census, that you put in when you put your reports and your presentations for your clients.
Absolutely. The HILDA is one of the big gold standard reports in Australia because it does provide the longitudinal data, and it provides this very human data that creates, it's very, very tangible because you understand how we actually behave as humans. Part of my storytelling on stage when I'm presenting at conferences, boardrooms, at strategy days, is just to tell people, to make people feel and understand how Australians behave in different life cycles, under different economic circumstances. And then with this kind of knowledge, businesses can better tailor their service offerings and so forth, or their pricing. They can adjust their pricing strategy and so forth. That's what I do for a living when I'm not recording podcasts with you for pure fun.
Well, what I'll do is leave a link in the show notes to the demographics group where people can have a chat with your team and see how you could help their business, their organization, their institution to take advantage of these demographic trends. Not take advantage of people, but understand what people need so you can help them. Now, in a moment, I just want to have a chat about one of the quietest but most interesting findings in the HILDA report, but I'd also like to explain that at Metropole, where we help our clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth, we spend a lot of time looking at demographics as well. I see demographics being even more important over the long term than the short term ups and downs of interest rates or government policies. So when we put a strategic plan together for our clients, we help them by understanding what the property markets of the future are going to look at, not this week's hotspot or which is going to be next week's not spot. So if you're interested in taking advantage of this new stage of the property cycle where 2026 is still going to bring some significant price growth, but you don't want to make the mistakes so many others make, go to metropole.com.au. I'll leave a link in the show notes and organise a strategic wealth chat with one of our strategists. Now, Simon, one of the quieter but most interesting findings, disappointing findings, I think, in the report was Australians are feeling lonelier. What's behind this?
Well, there's quite a few culprits, so to speak. Less time is one of them. You work longer hours. If everyone works longer hours, you have less time to socialize, so you can feel a bit more lonely. You also live on average further away from your place of work, so you have longer commutes. So you don't have time to socialize in those times as well. Then there is, of course, we have a certain kind of digital substitution for real life interactions. We communicate more via screens. There's much more communication one to many, where you in group chats and so forth. These things do not feel, or on social media, these do not feel as good to a person psychologically than just having a beer or a coffee with your
Yeah,
friend or a chat.
yeah.
We see because of the lack of time, we see declining participation in clubs, churches, sports, volunteering organizations. All of these things are absolutely crucial parts, traditionally speaking, for how people see themselves valued. And so we do less of that. That has negative impacts. Sprawl, of course, means you now live more and more in car dependent, non-walkable areas. Therefore, the idea of getting out somewhere is a bit more cumbersome. It needs to be a much more deliberate, so we do less of that. We, of course, now have more aging people living in those car dependent areas. At a certain time in your life, you stop driving as much, and your friends also stop driving as much, so you see them less frequently. That adds to more loneliness. And of course, we have the idea of remote work. That means if I work more remotely, yes, I have more time with my family, but I'm much less likely to go for a lunch date with a colleague to create a human connection, to meet a former colleague or friend for coffee or something like this, for beer after my workday. So we create an environment where the natural opportunities for socializing go down. And we now bear the consequences of this.
I've read, unfortunately, young people are suffering more from this loneliness, despite having more, let's call them digital friends. What's going on here, Simon?
Yeah, so we must not overemphasize the digital network size. This is quality over quantity is absolutely the case, and in person rather than digital is also important. And so yes, they have more larger networks, but they have smaller in person networks, and of course they have more social pressures because we put them under this constant social media comparison stress, and that reduces confidence because you go, boy, all these other people, they have more interesting lives. It makes sense. You look at the best filtered perspectives of a person's life while you're sitting on the loo. And you go, well, that is more expensive than me on the loo. And so you go, that's not helpful. We push this kind of behavior. Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, they also have this kind of social media phenomenon, but they didn't experience this in their formative years. We push our young generations through this in their formative years. That's the early teens to late 20s. That's when you really form your personality, your worldview in a lasting way. And yeah, we're forcing this on young people for the first time, and it does have negative implications for, well, lots of things, so to speak.
So we know a lot of business owners are listening to this or watching us. How does loneliness impact workplace performance, Simon?
Well, I think you could almost put this a positive spin on this. This is the idea. If you bring your teams together, you will not get people into the office 5 days all the time. That's gone. But you need to make sure that your team comes together in the office as a whole, because that's where you form the relationships. And you must then allow for your whole team to have socializing time in the office. Not only does that provide a sense of belonging, it minimizes loneliness, but it also increases a sense of team spirit, a sense of belonging to your company, which is very, very helpful for you to become the best organization that you can. So you must foster this as a boss, I would say. And that, of course, it needs deliberate, proactive management to align a team to come into, you say, yes, work from home in a couple of days, but on a Tuesday and Wednesday, everyone must be here. And I'm doing this for the greater good of the company, blah, blah, blah. But it's hard to pull this off. I can just easily say this while I am working from home, but you rely on it. And so if you are a small business owner, a sole entrepreneur or something, co-working spaces would be a good thing, because people experience the same kind of things. So double down
Yes,
on co-working.
yes.
Also, we are seeing a massive increase. I'm not sure how much this is linked to that. Social fitness. So this is Zumba, cycling, CrossFit. These are all fitness things where you are not in the gym alone lifting your weights, but you socialize while you do this. So join those things. And there are more and more hospitality venues that try to have those community-oriented events where they get together strangers for a big shared meal. And of course, we see that socializing now takes place in third spaces anyways, because few people have the big backyard to invite people over for a barbie. So you either go to a park or to a hospitality venue to do this. And we see the first emergence. I don't think it's a mass phenomenon just yet. Apps that facilitate friendships. So this is essentially like Tinder, but for friendships rather than the bedroom. We just want to try to find new people. And we now have research available that I saw the other day for the first time, because we say, and it's probably true in your life, I guess, the older you get, in each decade of your life, you make fewer friends. If you go like, when did I meet my new friends? You go like, in your teens, you have heaps of friends. In your 20s, quite a bit. At university, in the 30s, it really slows down. If you make friends in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're doing really well. And so how can we facilitate that? But the research shows that if people proactively look for friends in their 30s onwards, it's actually relatively easy to make friends as long as they're roughly in the same age because everyone is willing. So it's quite a bizarre bit of research that I came across there.
Well, only yesterday, somebody was telling me, a gentleman was telling me how having a dog made it so much easier. He'd be in his 70s now. I think he was 76, but he goes for a walk with the dog. And if he started to speak with a stranger, especially a female, it would be seen as maybe a bit intrusive. But because others are walking their dogs as well, firstly, dogs help. Animals in general will help your loneliness. They're great companions, but it also opens the door to discussions with other people, Simon.
Absolutely. As is absolutely invisible to anyone in this podcast, I'm having a cat on my lap right now to solve with my personal loneliness while I work from home. But it's really that it's what a dog is when you walk a dog in a dog park is an excuse to start a conversation.
Yes.
And you do this often enough because the dog needs to wee all the time. But then bit by bit, you create a tiny bit of a rapport with these people, and then you end up having real conversations. And you don't really know when this started. And that's fascinating. Yeah. And it's always the first wedge that you need into a person to have a conversation, and then a real rapport can start. And that's quite wonderful. Yeah. And so all the power to dog owners, so forth. Cats don't help with
Well,
that. They just help with general loneliness.
interestingly, I take our dog Lincoln for a walk every day, and one of our cats, Bentley, is just sitting here right next to me, just like you've got. But there's a fellow down the street who actually takes his cat for a walk with a leash. Haven't seen that before, but he walks up and down the street with his cat. For property people interested in property, I think one of the trends we've got to remember is the importance of the 20-minute neighborhood, the fact that you'd like to be able to drive, ride, walk to community facilities, whether they're gyms, places of religion, shopping, education, entertainment. And I know that people have started to appreciate that during COVID, Simon, especially in Melbourne, but that hasn't gone away. People are prepared to pay a premium to live in neighbourhoods where they can be closer to other people and things happening.
Absolutely. And so if we look at all this just cold, hard data about loneliness, is your loneliness will be much, much smaller in old age if you live in a walkable community. Yeah. So, and you have a certain kind of influence over that. So you can position yourself and move out of your car dependent suburb in your late 60s, early 70s, and move into a walkable community. We know that this will help you in old age from a data perspective. And of course, this should be a bit of a hint to our urban planners to build more of those walkable neighborhoods to begin with, so that we don't compete each other and price each other out of these few walkable neighborhoods that we are building after all. So this should well and truly be a mainstay of urban planning in this country.
Well, I know the Victorian government is planning to grow our population significantly, and is talking about lots of urban centres which are going to be 20-minute neighbourhoods. Let's see how they come out. So, Simon, last week we discussed the HILDA report. We finished it off today. If you didn't listen to last week's show, please, after you finished today's show, go back to that and have a listen. But if you had to pick out one of the most consequential trends from this year's data, which is going to shape the next 20 years or so, what would you pick, Simon?
Well, so I feel I actually would want to stick with loneliness because this is a new mass phenomenon. And it is something that we could influence at the moment. So that's the whole point, is if we let to run this out, without caring it, you'll have a lonely society. And we know that this is negative impacts for mental health. We know that this
Yes.
spikes suicides and so forth. And we can fix this. And so it's such a nice thing of knowing a problem before it becomes an absolute mass phenomenon, because you could then theoretically counteract this through urban planning, through more proactively pushing people into certain kind of environments. The workplace also plays a role. So if you know you must bring your team together as a whole, that's the important thing, is that everyone is in the office to create the sense of belonging. So we can do this. So I think focusing on the purely human element here is nice, because the HILDA study has such a big human element in it.
Well finished off, Simon. Thank you. And thank you for listening or watching us, and another episode of Demographics Decoded. As you've seen from the latest HILDA results, Australia isn't standing still. We're wealthier than ever. We're despite that, facing extra costs, we're working longer, and many of us unfortunately feel isolated. And we've discussed how the gap between homeowners and renters, especially in retirement, is widening. It's something that will reshape our social culture, our social landscape. Now, these aren't abstract statistics, as Simon pointed out a moment ago. It affects people, humans. So it's important for business people, entrepreneurs, policymakers to understand this. If you understand where Australia is heading, you can position yourself, whether you're an owner, a business owner, a property investor, you can position yourself to make smarter decisions. And that's what we're about each week. So subscribe to Demographics Decoded on your favorite podcast app or YouTube or Spotify. And each week, Simon and I are going to share our thoughts about how you can prepare for the future. And if you enjoyed today's show, apart from subscribing, just do us a favor. The one thing we ask of you, please just share it with one other person that you think is going to benefit as well. We love seeing our community grow so we can share these ideas. Look forward to catching up again next week, Simon.
Yes, yeah, see you next week.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.